about is really related to the passage that we had for the children. Okay? Here's what happened. This is from the Gospel of Mark, and Jesus went up to the top of the mountain, and he was transfigured. He was changed. And his disciples were there and said, wow, look at all this beautiful glory of God and the presence of God. They were so excited, and then they were going to build a little tabernacle, a sukkah booth for the feast to try to keep the presence there. But then the disciples looked up and Jesus said, no. And they were gone, and the presence was gone, and so were the two Old Testament characters. But here they're coming down the mountain and feeling tremendous because they just experienced the presence of God, the Shekinah glory, the glory that they've only heard talked about in the Old Testament. But they were experiencing it there, the presence of the living God. They were all excited. But Jesus said, don't tell anybody, because I have other people I want to explain. So wouldn't you know it, and this is true, once you get a blessing, and once you start to think, wow, maybe I can minister in some way or shape or form, guess who all comes in there and tests you? Old Slewfoot, the old devil, tests right away. Challenges you and says, you're no good. You can't do anything. You're hopeless. It's helpless. Forget it. All those familiar things. And all those are lies, because that's the only thing the devil can tell is a lie. Now, it was happening. There was a man who had a son, and this son couldn't speak and couldn't hear. He was deaf and dumb. And he brought him to the disciples, and he asked the disciples, can you heal? Because he has been possessed by a demonic spirit, a deaf and dumb spirit. He's been captured by that. So I want to see my son free. So I brought him to the disciples. Disciples couldn't do it. They failed. They couldn't do it. So then then Jesus came on the scene, and he said, the man said, well, can you do anything for me? Can you help me? And then Jesus gives a very powerful answer. I want to just read a couple, and this is from this particular translation, but it's from the Gospel of Mark. So Jesus said, oh, what a generation. Oh, he said, the disciples said we couldn't do anything. So Jesus said, what a generation. No sense of God. How many times do I have to go over these things again and again? How much longer do I have to put up with this? Bring the boy here. They brought him when the demon saw Jesus, it threw the boy into a seizure and causing him to writhe on the ground and foam at the mouth. He asked the boy's father, how long has this been going on? Ever since he was a little boy. Many times it pitched him into fire or in the river to do away with him. If you can do anything for him, if you can do anything, do it. Have heart and help us. And then I love Jesus' reply. Now in the King James version, the reply is simple. It's nothing is impossible with God. But the way they translate this, I love it. I hope you remember it. Jesus said, if there's no if among believers, anything can happen. If there's no if among believers, anything can happen. And what that reminds me of, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie. Oh. Shall I go on the other side of this? Am I okay? I'll try it over here, see if I get farther enough away from that speaker. Okay. There was a movie, I think it was Tom Hanks started it, called A League of Their Own. And what it was a movie about the women playing baseball during the Second World War because all the men were away. All the men were in the army. But Tom Hanks somehow gets the notion that he is supposed to be coach of this girls' team. So he's coaching them, and he's tough. He's tough. Come on, run faster, slide into first, get with it, you know. And one of the players came over to him and started crying. And what did he say? Crying? There's no crying in baseball. Crying? There's no crying in baseball. And that reminds me of this phrase. There's no ifs among believers. There's no ifs. Anything can happen. And then Jesus proceeded to do it, to cast out the demon from this child. And it says he identified the filthy spirit, and he gave him marching orders. It's out of him and stay out of him. And screaming with much thrashing about, it left the boy pale as a corpse. So he started saying, he's dead. But Jesus, taking his hand, raised him up. The boy stood up and was whole. What a tremendous story. And I want to tell that because I believe most of you here believe in deliverance and believe that we have that same authority to set people free. And here's the thing. Do you know of anything that in your life you would categorize as impossible? Can you think of something other than your husband or wife? Impossible. You know, what would you list as impossible? A pay raise? A job? What would it be? An understanding friend? What would be impossible? One of the things that I list as impossible is people to get saved without the Holy Spirit working in their life. I have no idea how someone could possibly make a trip to heaven, so to speak, without it being orchestrated by the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit taking that hard heart, softening it. Taking that thick brain skull, softening it. Opening up understanding. All of this. To see people changed and converted, humanly speaking, is impossible. But with God, all things are impossible. There's no ifs for believers. Anything can happen. There's no ifs for believers. Anything can happen. And I want to extrapolate that and make that a little bit bigger and say, do you think it's impossible for revival to come to America? Do you think it's very possible for revival to come to America? Do you think people will be on their faces crying and praying and seeking God's presence? Do you think that's possible? Or is that still in the category of impossible? Humanly speaking, without the work of the precious Holy Spirit, it's impossible. But not with God. There's no ifs for believers. There's no ifs for believers. Anything can happen. And I want to build your faith to encourage you this morning about a nation being changed, about God changing people. Now, some of these stories, this one story I want to show you today, has been one that we've seen Wednesday night. We've seen many. We've seen countries in India, in Africa, like Uganda, radically changed. We've seen other countries. We've seen countries, Ireland, radically changed. We've seen countries up near the Arctic Circle, radically changed. And I want to show you a little bit of that, where there's hardly any people, hardly any life. Life is cold and dreary, and the only thing that was happening was people getting drunk, women being abused, and suicide. But God visited them. And that's what I want to encourage you. There's no ifs for believers. Anything is possible. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? Anything is impossible. So get out that list of impossible things. Write them down and then write across them. Nothing, no ifs among believers. So we're going to show that this is about 15, 20 minutes long. Okay? Ready?